and welcome to our panel. I think I was just introduced. My name is Hasan, and I'll be moderating this panel. I have an excellent star-studded cast of BIPOC heroes here joining me. I just want to take a quick moment and do a little round table of everyone introducing themselves, maybe starting with Jude.
Hi, I'm Jude Benoit. I am a Indigenous Two-Spirit activist in the city of St. John's. I'm urban Indigenous. I'm from a lot of different places in Kudumi, which is the Mi'kmaq word for Newfoundland. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited.
Welcome. Next, Dr. Jarrett. Zainab.
Hi, I'm Zainab Jarrett, the Executive Director for Tombolo Multicultural Festival, Newfoundland and Labrador. And I'm happy to be here and hope to share ideas with everyone on the panel.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sobia Shaikh. I'm a co-chair of the Anti-Racism Coalition and also co-lead of a project called Addressing Islamophobia in Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm also a faculty member at the School of Social Work at Memorial University. And I'm proud Newfoundlander and happy to be here with all of you.
Welcome, Sobia. Thank you, everyone. So we're here to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is racism. I'm just kidding. But I'm very excited for this conversation. So I thought we would kick it off. And a question for everyone. And just let's see where the conversation goes. But let's talk about anti-racism in Newfoundland and Labrador. So the question is, how do we encourage it in our communities, our schools, and our province overall? Just Jude, maybe any thoughts to lead that one?
Oh, I should first say that I am also representing the Indigenous Activist Collective, just boosting that because we're new. And that leads me into what my answer would be. I think that in Newfoundland and Labrador, especially, but all over Turtle Island, that to take an anti-racist approach, we also have to take a decolonial and indigicizing approach as well. Often I see those two categories separate when I think that really they're very interwoven with each other.
Excellent. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I'll go next and then I'll let Zainab say that. I think one of the ways we encourage it is by really figuring out what anti-racism is and actually having the conversations amongst ourselves, and ourselves means white folks, people who have traditional roots. To Newfoundland, it means Indigenous folks, it means racialized folks, it means Black folks, it means all of us together within our own communities and outside of our own communities. So that's how I would say that we would start encouraging, what is anti-racism and just figuring out what that is and what it means for us to do that in this province specifically.
Great. And Zainab, anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, just briefly to mention that in our own case, that's the Tombolo Multicultural Festival. We look at that as a way of encouraging anti-racism through sharing cultures or giving people the opportunity to experience the culture of other people, because I think one of the root causes of racism is lack of knowledge. And we bring cultures together through whether music, dance, food, and by learning and experiencing other people's cultures, that helps you or helps me to not only respect but appreciate their culture and like it and say, oh, this is different, but this is my culture, this is their culture. So getting to know the other person's culture will help me to look at them as human beings, fellow human beings, and not try to be racist towards them.
So as a follow-up question to that, the conversation about racism and what racism is, and obviously it's a very nuanced thing, but most people understand in important ways what racism is. and feel that as long as I, as an individual, am not being actively racist, I'm doing good in the world. So the concept and the word anti-racist and anti-racism is, for many people, relatively new and a little bit confusing. So why is it important? What is the difference between not being racist and being actively anti-racist? And why is that important to differentiate? So, Sobia, you look like you might have something there.
I have lots of things to say, so let's try to go back, because I think Jude also and Zainab have a lot of things to say, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think that I think to follow up a little bit is that anti-racism for me is first and foremost an explicit focus on race and race process of racialization, which are based on narrow ideas about narrow and false ideas about racial hierarchies. So where whiteness is seen as somehow the norm or the standard to be achieved, and then you have this whole, that's where anti-Black racism comes in. That's where anti-Indigenous racisms come in. I think that the idea is that there's a long time ago, sorry if I go a little bit too technically, a long time ago there was this idea that we could be categorized, people could be, we're not just human, but we were categorized in different ways. So when Zainab talks about, we're all human, really bringing back to that humanity it's a really important goal. But I think that the idea that somehow some people were more human and some people were less human is part of the ways in which many of us who are racialized or who are Black or who are Indigenous often deal with this issue from the beginning to the end. And these ideas about race were faulty, they're scientifically faulty, they're not true. And we all like to say sometimes in the academy that they're social constructs. And what that means is that they themselves, that color of our skin, it really doesn't matter. It's just that it's made to matter in how we organize ourselves in families, in communities, in organizations and nations. So the idea, lots of ills and evils have been and continue to be perpetuated on these ideas. Colonization could not have happened without racism, and colonization around the world, but specifically when we talk about colonization, we have to talk about it here in this province, in this country, and in this many nations that we live in, we call Canada or we call Newfoundland. And I think that I think that the urge to and I see this a lot from racialized communities, and it's an appropriate action, is to remind people that I'm going to stop talking in a second. Remind people that we're humans and we're just like you is an anti-racist act. And in my opinion, it's only one anti-racist act. It's not enough. But we'll talk a little bit about that soon.
Great. And Jude?
Yeah, I want to make sure that I'm answering your actual question. Could you repeat it again? Sorry.
That's a challenging thing to ask when we take this meandering route here. Is what did I even ask originally? I wish these notes were helpful here. It was the importance in differentiating not being racist versus actual anti-racist or being anti-racist, and not just a definition, but what does that mean and why? Help people understand why it's important to differentiate.
I think the first thing we all need to understand is that we're all racist. That racism is something that you can't just work really, really hard and then one day you're no longer racist. I think it's an ongoing learning thing. I know for myself that I have needed to get a lot of education from the people around me and to seek it out in order to do less harm to other people. I grew up in rural Newfoundland and with very little access to diversity. And I think a lot of Newfoundlanders use that excuse of, I'm from the Bay, or I currently live in the Bay. I don't know anyone. And that's not a very good excuse, to be honest, especially considering that the first people of this island are very much alive and thriving and here. And Newfoundland is not a culture. We often hear things like, Newfoundland only has a 1% population of people that aren't white, and Newfoundland culture is. And then the examples of Newfoundland culture that are given are of colonial ideas of what it is to be a Newfoundlander. One of the most hurtful things I've seen this week was a local business owner went on a rant online publicly about how colonialism has given us all of the things that we love about Newfoundland. And don't get me wrong, I live downtown. I love our jelly bean row houses. I love a good chick's dinner every once in a while. But to claim that Newfoundland is only where it is because of the genocide and death of Indigenous people is extremely harmful. And I think I kind of see that stuff all the time. It builds up over time, and it becomes this, Newfoundlanders are nice. We're not racist. But we really are. We really have a deeply ingrained type of racism that is, it's very harmful. I hope that answered the question.
You know what? It's a great conversation is all we're aiming for here. Not specifically answers to what I asked. Zainab, anything to add to that?
Well, I think they've said pretty much most of the things I wanted to say. Just maybe to point out the idea of being not racist and someone who is actively an anti-racist person. The downside of the person who is not racist is that the person might not realize that his or her neighbor or the person next door is racist. So, like, you are not racist, that's fine, but if you see it happening, try to educate that person who is racist, that you observe is not racist, or that you see being treated as someone that is inferior to the other side. Try to not fight or insult, but just try to let that person say, look, what you just said or what you did to this new immigrant, for example, it's not fair, not judging. So probably I will encourage people who are not racist to try to do that, to protect someone who is being discriminated against or something like that.
Yeah, it sounds like what I'm hearing, and certainly from my own experience, is that one of the important differentiators between not being racist, which we know is a bit of a misnomer there, because despite how uncomfortable the label of being a racist is that accepting that it permeates everything, and being a racist, not the end. I mean, this is a weird thing to say, but being a racist doesn't mean that give up because you're an awful person. It means it's an opportunity. And we can expand on this a little bit here to learn and to grow and recognize those sort of unconscious biases that, all of us have in different ways, and learn and grow beyond that. And then, so being not racist in this passive way versus being actively anti-racist, and recognizing that we can't be bystanders, or we can't change things by not challenging them in some way, whatever that context is. And thus we enter into the realm, the broad spectrum. That's a whole other conversation about what being anti-racist means. And it can be everything from saying something. It could be responding to a Facebook post. It could be taking action in your workplace or amongst your family or friend group, and a variety of things. But I want to turn it around a little bit here. And Jude, I had a question for you. So as a two-spirited Indigenous activist, what message do you have for other Indigenous youth who may have been the target of discrimination? And then a follow-up to that is, well, you know what? I'll let you answer one question before I nail you with the second one.
I mean, my advice is to try your best to fight the urge to hide. a lot of Indigenous people, we are white passing. We can come from these places where we're in an Indigenous community, where everyone knows our family's Indigenous. We experience bullying and violence and harm, and then we come to an urban area, and it is so tempting to hide. It's so tempting to try to. I mean, it's survival is really what it is. And when I first, as an Indigenous youth, when I first came out here, I spent the first couple of years trying not to tell people, not to let them know that I was Indigenous. Um, and that really isolated me from a lot of the resources and help and people and family that, and it created a lot of internal problems within myself. I think that that would be my first piece of advice to youth is to, be proud of who you are and celebrate and uphold your culture, your languages. It's okay to not know your language. It's okay to feel displaced. It's okay to have been raised by people that aren't Indigenous and then try to get back into connection. There's so many great groups in town. There's so many great resources. You can find an online community if you'd rather. If you are Two-Spirit and you're trying to figure all that out, there's so many great things you can reach out to and find other people. Not only will that help your resilience, help you feel more powerful, and help you as you go, it'll also build a community around you. And then before you know it, you'll be so comfortable with relearning things that have been taken from you. And I think that that's really important.
Excellent. So my follow-up question to that um, is now not to place the sort of emotional labor on yourself and other Indigenous folk, but for us non-Indigenous folk, where can we start as far as for those of us who want to be better allies, but may not be aware of Indigenous people in our own network? And I say that because I think a lot of people are surprised at just how great the Indigenous population in Newfoundland and Labrador is, because of course not everyone would quote unquote look Indigenous and be many might be white passing, and so we may not and obviously at a glance you can't tell what someone's actual cultural heritage is. But for those of us who don't know where to start, um, how can we start working towards being better allies? Is there a starting point?
Yeah, I mean, it's most people who, especially newcomers, people that don't know about Indigenous people. I often hear like, I didn't know that Newfoundland had Indigenous people, from everyone, including people that have lived here all their lives. And to that, I would say you're not alone. The government of Canada has done their best to assimilate and colonize us, so that we are invisible. I mean, even our status system that says, whether you are or not Indigenous, which I think is absolute nonsense. That a piece of paper does not mean whether or not you are Indigenous. But even that, like as the generations move down, as people have kids, and it depends on who you marry and all this kind of stuff, um, then eventually your status runs out, and that's like kind of like a permanent, really weird
Yeah.
category for completely assimilating Indigenous people. So I mean, it's not. It's not your fault, is what I want to tell people that you don't know or you may not know us. But ways to combat that would be to meet Indigenous people. Some of us are so friendly, and we have so many different events happening, and cultural and spiritual events. Or if you tend to be more political, which I would say there's really no option there in today's world. You have to be political, then you can come join us at protests and rallies. Or you can go to First Light, and they, accept everyone into their programs, not just Indigenous people. All kinds of people are usually always welcome. The university, if you're an international student, has its own Indigenous groups, and it might seem really intimidating to just go into a group that you don't know anything about. But I promise you, that's really the only way to do it, is to get to know Indigenous people firsthand.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So that's absolutely great. So one thing that I was thinking of there, because of course, when the topic of allyship, which everyone is talking about that in a variety of contexts, and people and the need for allies, but also the responsibilities of those who wish to be allies of doing the work themselves and not leaning or placing the burden on Indigenous, Black, or people of color, or whatever group that you're trying to be an ally for. And what I really love is what you've outlined is that instead of reaching out to an individual and maybe asking, what can I do, and placing all that burden on them, is maybe take the initiative and meet the community. And it's not a burden placed on one individual. Now, granted, of course, the context will be different, is that maybe in your community or there may be only one Indigenous person but I mean, they may have a connection to a cultural association of some sort. And it sounds like leaning towards the institution, the organizations that are built to provide knowledge and education would be a more scalable way of people learning. And because being an ally, as everyone on this call knows, is a journey. It's not like one day you read one book or you talk to one person and you are declared, I've won, I'm now an ally. It's a journey that you take, and you have to start somewhere. And that education piece, and not putting the entire burden on, or any significant burden on on individuals in the community, is very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Zainab. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Did you have? This is
Oh no.
the magic of Zoom calls. Is that did something happen? Did you freeze? What's going on? Zainab. So you have a passion for anti-racism and working in this area for many years. What lessons have you learned from other jurisdictions that can be brought back to Newfoundland and Labrador?
Well, the Newfoundland case is quite different from my perspective. I'll just give you a little bit of my background. I came to Canada in '92 as a mature student at Mont, not young. So, but before I came, going back to my high school days, in Nigeria, we have what we call Unity College or Federal Government College. And that one is a school that admits students intentionally from all over Nigeria. So when I earlier told you that we have more than 250 languages, that means 250 tribes. So they try to put 250 tribes in one school. So that gave me an idea of what multiculturalism is, or having people from different cultures within Nigeria, but literally different cultures. So when I came, I said, what do I do? First was to learn more about Canadian culture in general and Newfoundland culture in particular. So when I graduated from one in folklore, that's actually a tool for me to know how to practice and also help to encourage. The word anti-racism is real, but I like to say cultural diversity, like having people of different cultures together. To me, that's what I call anti-racism, that people accept each other's culture, even though they come from different cultures. So from another past, I traveled a lot in Canada over the years, and I've been to Ottawa, did some workshops there, Athabasca, been to Toronto and all that. I noticed that the diversity there, especially in the 90s, is different from the one here in Newfoundland. Like I was among the few African, I don't use the word Black, not that it's a bad word, I just say African. I'm African. Now I'm African Canadian. I don't use the word Black or white, because where I came from, even though we were colonized by Britain, sorry, I'm digressing. We were colonized by Britain, but we were not described as Black or white, just by our tribes or the languages we speak. So when I came here, and as I said, travel outside of Newfoundland, I discovered that in other provinces or other cities in Canada, they are more culturally diverse, especially in the 90s than here. So I didn't, for some reason, and I'm not trying to downplay the idea that, or the fact that a lot of people have experienced racism, and we have people who are trying to promote anti-racism. What I considered after seeing what is happening in other parts of Canada and here, I said, okay, now that there are people of different races here, what can we do to make sure that people who are indigenous to the province, First Nations people, or if you are Irish descendant or Scottish or English, when you see someone from Africa or from the Middle East living and working or studying in Newfoundland, what can we do now that we have people from other cultures living here in Newfoundland with people who have been here years before us? Right. So my approach, as I mentioned earlier, is to create programs that people can have the opportunity to come together and not only see, but experience all these diverse cultures. I didn't see that in Toronto, but because I didn't stay there for too long, maybe sometimes I go and spend just a weekend or 1 week. So I'm sure they have like festivals or multicultural concerts or activities that are maybe organized either by the Chinese community, by the Indian community, but they invite others to attend and participate and experience. So I wouldn't claim that we are the first to start creating multicultural programs or activities here, like the festivals. But I, for some reason, didn't copy it from outside. I'm sorry. So that's what, but I just feel that perhaps they are being done in other parts of Canada, but I won't claim that I learned it from there and brought it here as a way to promote anti-racism. But we do it here now.
Excellent.
So sorry, I didn't answer your question. I think I'm sorry.
I don't know why it seems so intimidating that everyone feels like they have to answer my questions. Half the time I don't remember what I asked, and that's okay. It's this lovely meandering path of let's have a conversation about this very important topic. One thing that I was thinking as we were chatting, and I myself have lived in many parts of Canada. I've lived literally coast to coast and a couple places in between as well. And I've lived in various communities that, and you, Zainab, you spoke of diversity and that being very essential. And diversity and people who are in one community now, but who are from a variety of backgrounds and communities coming together and living together. And some of my own experience, particularly living outside of Newfoundland and Labrador, is that obviously there is probably a different mix of different cultures living, cohabiting in the same spaces. Whereas we know with Newfoundland and Labrador is predominantly one culture or people from one specific, European background. But that's not to say that, we have a healthy Indigenous population, which is much higher, as I mentioned in Jude, is that most people don't realize just how large the population is because, of course, not everyone is visibly Indigenous. And I'll use the air quotes there because whatever that means to different people, but also people who are non-Indigenous and from different backgrounds as well. One thing that I was just curious on your thoughts on is that in again, from the context of other parts of Canada, where there is people from diverse backgrounds, but culturally and business-wise, I mean, you could walk, downtown Ottawa, downtown Toronto, downtown Vancouver, and not just see people who are visibly of, different backgrounds, but also you can hear music and from different sources. You can hear conversations of different languages. You can see food from different cultures. You can smell things that are not the same kind of food that maybe you would have had in your own home as well. And having that visible diversity outside of the physical people in front of you, because I think and just I'm curious on your thoughts on this here, is that in Newfoundland and Labrador, you can have diversity in the sense of having people from different places, but that cultural diversity, that sense that this is perceived to be whatever this is the culture here, and everyone coming in maybe hasn't had their chance to make their mark or have that footprint of the Filipino community or people from I'm going to say African from a variety of different locales in Africa, or people from South Asia or whatever part of the world it may have originated from, and maybe we don't see that same footprint represented in other local businesses or ones that you talk about. Do you feel that is maybe a balance that needs to shift a little bit?
Is it me? Okay. Well, things have changed. Is it me? Am I to answer?
You know what? If you want to talk, it's you. You win.
See, I mean, historically, looking back now, like I came in 92, as I said, and this is 2020. I can tell you that things have really changed here. Newfoundland, not just because we do our events in Uganda, we are in St. John's, we are in Conception Bay, we've even done some events in Labrador City. And I can tell you that when I first came as a student, even to get my hair relaxer, my friend from the US would have to bring it either from Boston, and my friend from St. Louis would bring it, my hair relaxer for me. That was 92. But now I can go to Lawton's on Topsay Road and get hair relaxer. We have the African store downtown, Toy International. They sell food like ethnic groceries. You can go to Taste East and buy Asian spices. And so things have changed now. We are more diverse, not just in terms of getting ethnic groceries or food, but also even clothing, a lot of things that are from different cultures that we can find them in Newfoundland and Labrador, particularly in St. John's. But if we want to compare it with other cities or other provinces in Canada, we might say that Newfoundland is relatively less diverse, but it has really become a diverse province, culturally diverse province. More needs to be done. As we all know, those of us who work with the immigrants or with the new immigrant communities, that people tend to leave. Like now, just this morning, an entire family from Nigeria, they moved to Toronto just today. So people tend to leave, but still, I think Newfoundland is growing in terms of its cultural diversity or ethnic diversity.
Excellent. So we're going to move on from there. Sobia, I'm going to pose a question to you now. So when we're talking about anti-racism, it's also often coupled with discussion about diversity and inclusion. So should we view those as complementary concepts, or how do you see them in relation to one another?
It depends on which day I'm talking to you, but because I move in and out. I mean, I've lived in other places in Canada as well, and I've been here for 11 years in the province, and have been visiting in the winter. I'll tell you, I must love Newfoundland in February every year for the last, before that, for 10 years. So I've been connected to Newfoundland somehow for the last probably about 20 years. Or 18 anyway. And I think that the issue of inclusion, cultural diversity, multiculturalism is a very, very big part of our Canadian landscape. And I think that we have seen in other places, in Vancouver, for example, or in Guelph, Ontario, or in Hamilton, where I did most of my growing up, we've seen that multiculturalism by itself does not eradicate racism. And it's not that it's not important to do, because I think that work that is done by the generations and what we see as leaders in our communities, whether that be the mosque, whether that be sharing our cultures, which has done some really excellent work, whether that be Tombolo, as I hope I was pronouncing that right, that all those things, the farmers market, those are all really important pieces. But for me, and I think for a lot of other people, first of all, the idea of inclusion and diversity are both precursors and also outcomes of good anti-racist work. And I'll give you an example. Inclusion, you cannot have anti-racist work in an organization without having people from diverse walks of life. You cannot have anti-racism without understanding that the very land on which we are living has been a series of erasures and genocide throughout the history of Canada. You cannot, and multiculturalism will not eradicate that history. It will not eradicate the history of slavery or indentured workers coming in from other countries. It will not erase those things. yes, we can celebrate ourselves and our diversity. I think that's really important in my mind. And I'm very proud to be Muslim. I'm very proud to be from Southern Asia. I'm very proud to be Pakistani. I'm also very proud to be Canadian and Newfoundlander and Ontarian, you know, depending on where I am. So I'm really proud of who I am and where I come from. But that pride needs to have space in this society, but it's not enough. And when I said originally, you know, we talk about race, it's not polite to talk about race in almost anywhere in Canada, but especially here. People do not like to talk about our racial category. They don't like to talk about black, brown, whiteness. I mean, it's really uncomfortable because it's true. What I think people are saying is that I'm not a brown woman. I am a Pakistani Canadian, for example. Race only became important for me because of how I saw myself, Indigenous people, Black people, racialized, how we became this one group of other. And that's how it became important to me, was because of racism. I saw that, you know, the closer that I was, let's say, to Blackness, my brother hung out with very diverse communities, and he was surveilled and harassed by police in Ontario. He was hanging out with all sorts of people, and I stayed in my little bubble where, you know, because I was good in those days, and whatever good means, and I was not harassed in the same ways. I achieved, you know, I was closer to whiteness somehow. And I think that this is really important. I think that this conversation, you know, for me, diversity and inclusion are precursors. And when I say it's outcomes, I mean that if we are really being anti-racist, let's say as an organization, which is kind of my specialty, is anti-racist organizational change. And if we are being really, really anti-racist and we start to say, how is race organizing our everyday work, then inclusion and diversity will naturally be part of it. We wouldn't have to fight about inclusion and multiculturalism. And I think there's the last thing, I have a lot more to say, but I'm going to say the last thing that I want to say is that diversity, inclusion, and race equity work is really important. But it's not enough because it doesn't get at power of race. And I think that race as a organizing part of our society, as part of our communities, and part of our organizations. And it's really polite to say, hey, I just want unity, I want diversity, I love everybody. But it doesn't get at the power imbalances in the ways that I think anti-racist conversations do. So, you know, I think, you know, I keep going back to this, and racism is in our fabric, is in our cultural fabric, is in our very everyday work. We can't undo racism, but we can work against it.
Excellent. There's so much to unpack there, and I don't think there's enough time in this day or this week or this year to dive into every one of those topics there. But I wanted to comment on one sort of recurring theme, is that of, and you mentioned, Sobia, the word erasure of cultural identities. And I think it stands, I think we would all be on the same page, and anyone who is racialized in any way, we would love to live in a world where race was not a factor. As far as we would love to everyone be seen as equal. And there's often comments, particularly from those who I mean, because of their background, don't experience racism. I mean, they're not if you're not a racialized person, you're typically not going to experience racism in Canada. But the comments that I don't see race, I don't see color, while, you know, realistically, we know that they're coming from a good place. They're trying to say race is not an issue, and also I am not a racist because I don't see that. But Sobia, you brought up a good point, is that these are important cultural identities. And even though the color of our skin, you know, has no bearing on the person we are inside, or shouldn't, it does, in the sense that we have lived experience, and anyone who is racialized has lived experience, which is tied to the color of their skin. And so by saying I don't see color, I don't see race, or they're not important, we're erasing all of that. And I think forcing ourselves, for those who are uncomfortable having conversations on race, is that lean into that discomfort. And obviously, you know, don't harm people, but don't shy away from that discomfort. Like if it's making you uncomfortable, again, lean into it and try to identify why that is. So we have a little bit more time here. There's a number of questions from the audience. I did want to pose one question for the group here, and this is, unique for Newfoundland and Labrador, and the theme often comes up in response to topics, of course, about racism and racist systems. Is that, but we are a kind people, and we are the Newfoundlanders and Labradorians as a group are the kindest people in the world, or insert whatever it is, or the kindest people in Canada, or people from this community are very kind. And the word kindness is used to almost eliminate. You cannot be both kind and racist. What are your thoughts on that? Is that can a kind person be racist? Can they coexist? Who wants to leap at that one?
Let me come in here.
Yeah.
Using my example, I mentioned it earlier, but I am fortunate that, or maybe my way of thinking is quite different because of my being diaspora person, was African in the diaspora. So one example was, or incidents that happened was, I just submitted my thesis and I was waiting for my oral defense. I was in Bottom's Pond, just quick, and I was sitting by the pond feeding the dogs, and an elderly lady came. So the first question she asked me, and I knew, being a mature student at the time too, I knew, because she didn't know me. We were not telling each other or introducing each other as to who we were at the time. So she said, "Are you here to study English?" And I mean, now maybe someone would take that as being racist, but I didn't took it like that. I just thought immediately that, oh, she doesn't know me, so probably she thought I'm here to learn English. So I just told her, oh, no, I just finished my studies. I'm waiting to do my oral defense. And she was shocked and she apologized because I didn't react and got upset because I knew that she didn't know me. So she said that. The other one was quite recent, was last year actually. We were supposed to have an event, Tombolo in Uganda. So a lady called me because it was being advertised already in Uganda, the whole of Central Newfoundland. She said, "I heard you are coming here. You are not wanted. That we are not wanted in Uganda to organize Tombolo there." So I said, "Why?" She said, "Yeah. Are you Canadian?" So I had to tell her that, yeah, I've been here for more than 25 years. It was 92 years, last year, I think 27 years. So I was trying to explain to her that we are not going there to do anything. We are bringing newcomers so they will learn more about Central Newfoundland, see the people, interact, and we usually take new Canadians to tourist sites in Uganda area. So, but she wouldn't have it. And when we got there, the day the event happened, I wanted to go and, because I had her number, I wanted to find out how I can trace her to go and explain to her. So I look at that, she might not be racist, just maybe she had a story about newcomers, because the last point she said before she hung up on me, she said, "You are coming here to take up jobs from our people." So that's probably lack of knowledge, because I'm going there to work in Uganda. We are just trying to actually help integrate newcomers. So someone might look at her and say she's kind but racist. Again, it's hard for me to conclude that, but that could be, so the other person, like people like her, should probably understand that when they do something to a newcomer like that, it's considered as a racist act. So, but she could be kind. And I, like the lady that met me at Bottom's Pond, to me, she was kind, because we ended up, actually, I was hoping that I would see her again next time so I could cook African food for her, but we didn't see each other again. So it's very difficult to say whether or not someone could be, for me, could be kind and racist, but it's possible too that someone could be kind, but at the same time racist. I don't know. Sorry.
No, it's again, it's a great conversation. So I'm just going to add one comment here, and there's a number of questions from people watching that I'd love to dive into. But just one little comment here, and I think it's the perception that morality and someone's goodness means that, like, if you are a quote unquote good person, if you self-identify or you identify a person as that person is a good parent, they're a good family person, they're very loving, they do good things in the community, they're hardworking, and therefore they are kind and quote unquote a good person, or all the things that we as a society say a good person should be like or act like, and therefore they cannot be racist, because a racist person, a racist, is inherently bad. And it's that uncomfortable truth that good people can be racist as well. And that doesn't negate all of their goodness. It's just an opportunity to sort of look inwards and figure out, how do I move forward from this?
Just if I can add a little bit,
Yep.
you know, kindness is a choice that individuals make. And I think that we can decide to be kind. Sometimes being kind is naming racism in a more gentle, or you know, like Zainab is very gracious in how she does that. And sometimes being kind is actually naming it not kindly, because kindness, it depends who kindness is a relationship. Who are you being kind to? Are you being kind to the person who has just who has just been racist towards you? Are you being kind to your children when you when you do the labor of keeping people keeping people in their own humanities? I think that the issue of kindness in Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, I think kindness exists here like it does everywhere else, and kindness is really important. But that's not the same question about whether and how to do anti-racist work, in my mind. And I think that I know that, you know, I really appreciate, you know, that the reminders to be kind, to be gracious, either in when you're being racist or when you're being anti-racist, if there is a dichotomy. And I think that's really important. But for, you know, who are you being kind to and for? And most of us in my life anyways, I'm being kind for myself, because if I don't act in kindness and with integrity, then that's doing a disservice for anybody else. I think the conversation has got to shift a little bit, and really you know, work at what are we trying to achieve when we're being kind and good. And I agree with you that morality and racism, I know that they're so intertwined, and in some ways kindness, reminding people of their own kindness, is really a good anti-racist tool, because you want to be good, you want to be just, you want to be, you want to undo, you know, the inequities. So I guess the conversation, because Newfoundlanders, including myself, pride ourselves on being kind and generous and community minded. Those are really good basis to build anti-racist work.
Right. So one of the just another comment on that, and then we'll move on to some of these great questions, is that it's a time. It sounds like 2020, or maybe not just this year, but these times are times of challenging a lot of accepted notions. So challenging what I'm hearing, Sobia, in amongst all the gems of what you just presented there, are that challenging what kindness actually means and the definition of that, and because the context has changed, because people are being challenged as far as meeting people or interacting with people, whether in person or through social media or just media in general, with people with diverse backgrounds and backgrounds that often are maybe not fully understood or well understood, because many people, and this is true of all of Canada, but more so in many areas, or for many people in Newfoundland and Labrador who don't have a lot of experience, or if any experience, with people from diverse backgrounds, and not just meeting them. It's like, you know, having worked with a person from a different culture, but having no real social context other than one comment I heard a number of years ago from a person who was trying, I mean, they meant very well, and, you know, God love them, they tried to make it very positive, but they said, you know, I worked with, you know, a Pakistani person, a person from Pakistan in like the 70s or 80s, and they were no trouble at all. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. And yes, this is a person who means well and is trying to say, I am not racist. I work with this person and I never had any issues and with them because they never made any issues for me. But there's so much to unpack there. Is that they we need to challenge like what kind of relationships we have with people and understanding what their lived experience is beyond the surface. Like, one of the other parents in my school is someone, a person of color, and therefore I'm not racist because they exist and I haven't done harm to them. There's more to that, and like not causing harm equates to, or not obvious cause of harm equates to kindness because we haven't done anything to hurt them. We need to dig deeper. We need to go further than that. So there's a ton of questions. We have a little under 10 minutes now, and we're probably not going to get to all of them, but I just want to go into a few of them here. So a question from the audience is that two of you have been doing education, organizing, and work in the subject for some time. What is different about these current times, and that's in caps, in regards to how we combat racism and discrimination? And I'll ask is that maybe if whoever wants to jump in there, but we keep the answers to about 30 seconds or so, just so we can get through a few 30 seconds, 45 seconds. So what is different about these current times in regards to how we combat racism or discrimination? So Zainab, you've talked about your experience a little bit.
Okay, I think now with so many movements happening, I think we can start with First Nations situation, the African Canadians situation, and many women movements. So now people are more courageous, if I can use that word, to speak against and act against racism. In those days, I think, as you said, it was difficult. Like you can't even come out as a First Nations person and say, I want to, create a rally to protest against discrimination or racism. But now I think there's support everywhere, and the Black community are probably more aware of that or experiencing now where when there's protest or rally by the people from the African Canadian community, people from all races are supporting them. So it's different now. Like it's now a more collective or communal support for any causes or activism that is happening now. So different now.
How powerful?
I think it's very encouraging, and very helpful. Probably it might lead to more results or better results because everyone is for, not against those people who are protesting. So I think it's better now and probably be more impactful and positive, I think now.
Right. The face I made was hearing the echo of my own voice, which frightened me because it was terrible. I don't know if you're hearing the echo there. Okay, so I'm going to keep my words to a minimum so I don't scare myself and anyone else. Next question. This is for Sobia directly. As a longtime Newfoundlander and woman of color in a public-facing field, do you have any one experience, whether yours or what you've witnessed, to share of Islamophobia? So if you're comfortable answering that, to speak of personal experience.
I have so many. I guess I have so many. I'm getting hate mail in my inbox at work. So that's one example. It's I don't want to. I really I've been tipped with my colleagues 3 times this year. So, you're talking about micro and macroaggressions here. And I don't like the word microaggressions that much because micro is to white folks, and, to racialized Black and indigenous folks, it's more than just a micro. It's a way to explain little everyday things. I've had people say stereotypes about South Asian women, Muslim women as being somehow less assertive. I think you've met me now. There's all sorts of things, and I think I'm also seeing my Black colleagues, my Indigenous colleagues, being treated as less than class, anti-racist work is if it's not anti-classist, if it's not anti-colonial, if it's not anti-sexist, it's not really anti-racist work. So I guess I'm resisting the question slightly, but I'm also saying that it's in every act of my. If I stay in my house during COVID, I don't get to see anti-Asian racism, but if I go grocery shopping, I get to see it.
Right.
I get to be yelled at in a parking lot of Sobeys the minute I walk out of work, because I was pregnant at the time. I was sitting I was parked in a place where I was allowed to park because I was pregnant. It was a new pink parking spot. I literally got told that I wasn't allowed to park there by somebody who had no right to tell me that. And so, those are just little things, and I think I share that experience, but in different ways. I mean, not all racisms are the same. And I think that I've walked into I won't say which pub, but I walked in pub for lunch with a Black colleague of mine, and the police have stared us down. And so there's lots of times where you like, I guess I can keep going if you'd like, but I'm not going to, obviously. But there's lots of moments where I see anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and my own racism intersect. And I think that that's why I'm committed to this work. And that's it.
Okay, that's great. Never apologize for giving long, thorough, detailed, wonderful answers, any one of you here. I'm the one who should be apologizing. I wish there was no time limits. I wish we had days and days to talk about this, because these are such interesting and important conversations. We have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to pose one last question. I wish we could get to all the great questions from the audience. There's a ton coming in, but we won't have the time for that. So this one here, last one is, how can we do better in regards to educating people about multiculturalism and finding similarities over differences? Who would love to dive into that one here? And maybe taking maybe a maximum of a minute for that answer.
Jude hasn't said anything in a long time.
Oh.
Okay, I don't know if I'm going to answer this question or not, but I think it's really important to point out that, for Indigenous people right now, the thing that we are focusing on, that we are asking other people to focus on with us, is our very survival. We are being killed by the police. We are being forgotten by our government. We are out here being displaced. We are dying. And I really needed to say this today on this panel, because I think that the point of how to be anti-racist for us right now is to be anti-colonial. It's to fight the ideas that, I want to have a family someday, and I want to send my kids to a public school that has our stories ingrained, that to thrive and flourish in an anti-racist, anti-decolonial environment. But in order to get there and have a family and have children in this world, I need to feel like they will be safe, like they will come home at the end of the day.
Oh, I'm not sure. Might be frozen, Jude, or okay. All right, you're back. No, it's perfect here. Oh, sorry. Did you have more?
You lost me.
Yeah, we did right at the end there. So just in the interest of time, I just want to make one quick comment. Then I have a really quick, like 30 seconds for each person there.
I don't know where I left off.
You know what? Everything you said was wonderful and very important.
Yeah.
So you left off in a very good place. I think your points landed there. One thing that's come up over and over again is that the time of being passive and doing nothing and status quo is not enough. And making pledges for communities, and we didn't talk about specific schools, but what can people do? And what I've been hearing from all of our great panelists today has been that people need to be active. They need to be doing things. Simply existing and not actively causing harm or doing things that are perceived to be harmful is not enough to fix a lot of the problems and challenges that people, racialized people, Black, Indigenous people of color, and anyone who's racialized experience. One quick question from everyone, and just a quick roundtable, and maybe in one sentence. So, how can Newfoundlanders and Labradorians be better allies? What's the starting point? And maybe one sentence from each person. And maybe we'll start with Sobia on this one here.
I have two sentences.
Two's all right. We'll break the rules for you, but then we have to break it for everyone.
The first thing is to join the Indigenous Activist Collective on Saturday at 1 p.m. at the Confederation Building to protest police brutality and the continued, I want to say subjugation, but sorry, the continued subjugation of First Nations Indigenous peoples in this province. And the second answer I would say is, I don't think we want allies. We want people who take responsibility for racism, because we are not equally all responsible for racism and colonialism. And you, as people who want to do something, because that's why I think you're here on this panel or on this, I think you need to take responsibility for your own, I won't say a bad word, but for your own racism, and that's and your organizations. So I think that's 4 sentences also.
You know what? There were 4 great, powerful sentences. So, Zainab, any comments to that?
Yeah, for me, I want everybody, myself, anyone living in Newfoundland and Labrador, for us to be anti-racist means that it should come from the heart. No rules, no regulations, no protests can prevent someone from being racist. It has to come from his or her heart, knowing that we are all human beings. God created us differently. He knows why we are different. If he had made us all the same, probably it wouldn't be beautiful, as it was said that after 7 days, he created the heaven and the earth and everything in it, and it was beautiful. So God knows why he made us different. So we are not even God. We can't even play God, because if we play God, that means that everybody is the same. Everybody is beautiful. I mean, same in the sense that we are all human beings. So let it be like that, let it come from the heart that we are all the same. Under the skin, we are the same. One life to live, one breath, we have all emotions, and let's try to live together as human race, embrace diversity, and use it for the betterment of our society.
That counts as 1 sentence, because there's no punctuation in there, so it's all good. We're excellent. No, it's wonderful. Thank you. Jude, last but not least, any final comments on that? Oh, Jude, we may have lost Jude there. Get Jude back. Hello, Jude. Last couple seconds here. I don't know if you heard me.
I'm back.
We have a couple seconds left. So any quick comments on that last statement of what can Newfoundlanders and Labradorians do? How can they be better allies or leaders or help?
You need to start showing up to be active. Please come to the rally. Please do what you can from afar to support us. Please write letters and show up and ask how you can help. Racism is a systemic problem that is affecting all of us, and disproportionately affecting us, affecting Indigenous people and other racialized people. We need you to show up and support us. It's not enough to just make friends with your coworkers and start a book club. You have to show up. Thank you.
Amazing. Great comments. I want to thank, you know what, we're not over time. We took exactly how long we needed to get out the thoughts and comments that we wanted to get out there. So I want to thank all these great panelists, Zainab, Sobia, Jude. Thank you so much for bringing your own unique perspectives, your amazing experiences. Hopefully it's been great for the audience, and it's a start. It sounds like what I'm hearing is we need leaders, we need people showing up and doing the work, and not waiting to be told or tasked or tapped saying, allies is maybe not the best term anymore. Maybe it's we need leaders. We need people stepping up and doing the work. Thank you, everyone.